There are few peoples in the old world as feared, as hated, and as whispered of in trembling tavern songs as the Druchii, the Dark Elves of Naggaroth. They are a people forged in cruelty, a society that thrives not on the promise of hope or order, but on the relentless pursuit of domination, pain, and eternal vengeance. To encounter them is not to meet an army in the field, but to face an endless tide of nightmares made flesh. For to the Dark Elves, conquest is not measured in crowns or castles, but in the breaking of souls, the bending of wills, and the slow unraveling of civilizations. Their cruelty does not end at the battlefield, it begins there. What follows is enslavement, torment, and a darkness so deep it seems to devour memory itself. The old world pretends to know of raiders and pillagers, of orcs and beastmen, of chaos marauders descending from the north. But the Druchii are something different. They are not merely killers. They are harvesters, and it is whole nations that they seek to harvest. Before we descend deeper into the shadow of Naggaroth, before we trace the fates of those unfortunate enough to be taken by the corsair fleets, allow me a moment. If you find yourself drawn into the dark mysteries of the old world, if these stories of horror and legend awaken your fascination, then lend your strength to this channel by subscribing, by leaving your mark with a like, and by sharing these tales with others who hunger for the grim and the terrible. Such support ensures these chronicles continue to unfold, and that together we may keep walking the perilous roads of the old world. Our tale begins with the Black Arks, the vast floating fortresses of the Dark Elves, drifting titans of black stone and sorcery that blot out the horizon. When they appear upon the seas, they descend like storms of iron and shadow, bringing fire to the coasts and despair to those who watch helplessly from their walls. The first cries of the enslaved are born here, among burning villages and shattered watchtowers, where common folk discover what it means to be prey to the Druchii. From the shore, the captives are bound and driven into the holds of the corsair fleets, carried across endless seas or forced into long caravans across barren lands. The march into darkness strips them of everything familiar, until the only sound left is the chain that binds them to one another. They are led into Naggaroth, the land of chill, where frost and cruelty intertwine. There the Dark Elves break their wills with starvation, torture, and the unceasing removal of every last fragment of dignity, until silence itself becomes obedience. Within the cities of Naggaroth, Harganeth, and Clare Carond, entire towers and arenas rise upon the backs of the enslaved. The Druchii do not build with stone alone, but with suffering. The mortared walls of their fortresses echo with the labors of thousands who perish before their works are complete. Some are slaughtered for amusement in pits of blood-soaked sand, others are shackled to furnaces or shipyards until their bodies collapse. Even in death they remain reminders of how swiftly resistance is crushed. Beneath this brutal order lurks something more insidious, for the Dark Elves do not merely enslave the body, they consume the spirit. Their society is laced with cults of forbidden pleasure, rituals of pain offered to Slanesh, and perverse celebrations where captives are sacrificed not only as offerings of blood, but as tokens of despair. To live beneath the whip of the Druchii is to feel one's very soul eroded by a culture that exalts cruelty as the highest art. And yet the shadow of Naggaroth does not remain across the ocean, its echoes fall upon the old world itself. Bretonnian villages abandoned in the night, empire border towns left silent and hollow, Tilian merchants broken by ransom and ruin, all carry the scars of Druchii raids. Even when the sails of the Black Arks vanish over the horizon, the memory remains, poisoning the courage of kingdoms and sowing fear in every coastal hamlet. The question that lingers is not whether they will return, but how long until the next tide of chains washes across the old world once again. The Black Arks are not ships in the sense that mortals of the old world understand the word. They are cathedrals of stone and steel torn from the very cliffs of Naggaroth, raised into the skies by sorcery, and bound upon the sea with ancient magics that predate the founding of most human kingdoms. Each one is a fortress city, capable of carrying thousands of warriors, beasts, and weapons, and yet it moves as silently as a shadow across the water. Sailors whisper that the sea itself recoils when a Black Ark passes, that the waves turn sluggish and the gulls fall silent, as though nature itself recoils from the presence of these floating tombs. To see one upon the horizon is to feel the marrow turn cold, for every man who has glimpsed their approach knows what follows: fire, chains, and silence. When the corsair fleets of the Druchii descend upon the coasts of the old world, they bring not the chaos of a frenzied raid, but the precision of hunters who have rehearsed their cruelty for centuries. They strike at dawn when the fishermen are still mending nets, or at night when hearths are low and sentries nod in weariness. The village is rarely given time to fight, and if defenders rise, they are cut down swiftly by warriors clad in blackened mail and cruel helms shaped like leering beasts. To the Druchii, there is no honor in a battle fought openly, only efficiency in slaughter. A Bretonnian peasant dragged from his field, an imperial child taken from her bed, a Tylian merchant seized upon his ship, all are equal in their eyes, all nothing more than spoils to be gathered. The first moments of attack are filled with smoke and shrieking steel. Houses are set alight not because they are obstacles, but because fire spreads fear faster than blades. Mothers clutch their children and are dragged screaming into the streets. Men reach for pitchforks or rusted swords and are cut down before the thought of defiance is even finished. It is said by those who survive that the Druchii fight with laughter upon their lips, a mirthless joy at the panic they create. They do not kill to end lives, but to savor despair. Those they slay outright are considered fortunate, for the others are dragged in chains toward the shore, stumbling over corpses whipped forward by barbed scourges that tear flesh at every step. The landing sites are always marked by their ships, long and sleek, their prows carved into monstrous visages that seem to sneer at the shore. Rows of iron cages line the decks, already waiting for new occupants, while the holds below stink of sweat, blood and rot. The bound are thrown into these prisons with little care, stacked upon one another as cattle are in a pen. The air grows thick with cries and prayers to Sigmar, to the Lady, to Mor, to any god who might hear. But the Druchii have long learned to turn prayers into mockery. Priests captured among the villagers are given no special mercy. Indeed, they are often the first to be broken before the eyes of their people, their holy relics shattered, their robes torn, until the faith of the captives is reduced to dust along with their courage. For the Druchii, the act of capture is only the beginning. They do not raid to fill their coffers with gold or grain, though such spoils are taken with relish. Their true prize is flesh. Every soul torn from the old world is a tool to be shaped, a resource to be spent, a victim to be offered. Slavery to the Druchii is not incidental to war, it is its heart. Their cities thrive not through trade but through bondage, every tower and spire a monument built on chains. Thus the raids must continue, for without new captives the empire of Naggaroth would wither into dust. It is said that when the Black Arks sail away, the silence they leave behind is more terrible than the screams that came before. A village that once bustled with life becomes an ashen ruin, its streets empty but for the crows. Survivors, if any, stagger among the corpses, unable to comprehend the scale of the loss. Entire families vanish overnight, their names erased as if they never were. The Empire records them as destroyed by raiders. Bretonnia mutters of curses and ill fortune, but all know in their hearts the truth. The Druchii have come and gone, and what they leave is a wound that never heals. And yet, as terrible as the raids themselves are, they are only the threshold of a darker journey. For those bound in chains upon the decks of the Black Arks, their torment has only just begun. Beyond the horizon lies Naggaroth, the land of chill, where the very earth drinks despair, and where their captors will ensure that every breath drawn will serve cruelty's design. The voyage across the sea is a torment that unravels the spirit, long before the captives ever set foot on Naggaroth's shores. Within the iron cages and darkened holds of the Black Arks, air becomes a weapon. It grows thick with sweat and the stench of blood, every breath a reminder of closeness and despair. Shackles rattle with every lurch of the vessel, and sleep when it comes is thin and dreamless, broken by the screams of someone nearby who has yielded to terror. There is no sunrise for those trapped below decks. The Druchii deny their slaves even the comfort of the natural world, plunging them into a half-eternal night where time loses meaning. Above, the sea itself feels unnatural, as if bent by the sorceries that keep the Black Arks afloat. Sailors from the old world whisper of waters that boil beneath their keels, or of skies that seem perpetually shrouded by unnatural storms when the Druchii pass. For the captives there is no horizon to cling to, only the endless sound of waves slamming against stone hulls and the creak of chains echoing in their ears. At times the Druchii open the cages only to drag out one or two prisoners. The chosen are never seen again. Perhaps they are sacrificed at sea, their blood spilling into the black waters, or perhaps they are taken to chambers where sorcery feeds upon their anguish. Those left behind can only imagine, and in imagining they are broken further. The cruelty is not random. It is a craft, honed with purpose. The Dark Elves know that despair is most potent when it is carefully cultivated. They allow their captives to glimpse false hope, to think perhaps they are being spared for ransom or negotiation. Then, with a single act of sadism, that hope is destroyed, leaving only hollowness. A mother may be permitted to cradle her infant through the first nights of captivity, only to watch the child carried away by a gaoler whose face never betrays emotion. A soldier might be mocked for his bravery, promised a duel for his freedom, then executed without ceremony in front of his comrades. Every cruelty is calculated, designed not merely to punish, but to erode the very concept of resistance. Some captives pray through the ordeal, whispering to Sigmar, or to the Lady of the Lake, or clutching talismans of Moor to ward off despair. Others curse the gods outright, convinced that no divine hand could allow such suffering. Among them grow rumors, whispered between shackled lips, that Naggaroth is not a land but a living moor, and that those who sail toward it are already dead, their souls consumed before their bodies even arrive. The Druchii do nothing to dispel such rumors. They feed them, for they know fear is the most obedient gaoler of all. When the captives are dragged upon deck, it is rarely for mercy. The sun glares down upon pale faces unused to light, and the sea wind lashes salt into open wounds. From there they see their captors fully, warriors clad in cruelly wrought armor, their helms shaped to resemble monsters or leering visages, their eyes glinting like shards of ice. Some wear cloaks woven from the skins of previous victims. Others bear whips tipped with barbs, every lash tearing both flesh and pride. The Druchii do not speak in words the captives can understand. Their tongue is a sibilant, mocking song that twists like smoke, and every command is followed by a strike, as though obedience can only be taught with blood. Days blur into weeks, or perhaps months, for time has no meaning upon the cursed waters. The food thrown to the slaves is rancid, hard crusts of bread or salted scraps that burn the tongue with rot. Water is rationed cruelly, sometimes withheld for no reason but to watch the weak collapse in thirst. Yet survival persists, if only in stubborn fragments. Captives huddle together, sharing warmth in the darkness, whispering of home as though memory alone could anchor them. A child might be soothed by an older prisoner singing a lullaby of Bretonia, though the song itself trembles and fades into silence. In these moments, humanity clings to its last threads, but the Druchii are always waiting to tear them apart again. And then at last comes the sight of Naggaroth. The land of chill rises on the horizon like a scar of black stone against grey skies, its mountains jagged as the teeth of some vast predator. The air grows colder with every mile, until the salt spray on the skin feels like daggers of ice. For those who have endured the crossing, the first sight of the Druchii homeland brings no relief. Instead, it deepens the horror, for the land itself seems hostile, a frozen wilderness of shadowed forests and storm-lashed cliffs, as though even nature has been enslaved by cruelty. At the heart of this desolation, towering above the mists, the dark spires of Naggaroth pierce the heavens, their black walls like claws raking against the sky. It is said to be the city of execution, the throne of the Witch King Malekith himself, and every soul brought here knows they stand at the gates of their damnation. The Black Ark moors in silence, drifting into harbors carved from sheer cliffs by sorcery and slave labor. Chains clatter, gates open, and the captives are driven once more onto land. Yet even here, there is no sense of freedom. They have not reached an end, only a deeper beginning. Ahead lie the whips, the pits, the mines, and the forges of Naggaroth, where life is measured not in years but in screams. The air of Naggaroth is not like the old world. It bites with a cold that gnaws through cloth and skin, a chill that seems to sink into the marrow. For the captives stumbling from the Black Arks, their legs weakened by weeks in chains, the very act of breathing feels like punishment. The shore is jagged with black stone and strewn with the broken timbers of ships long wrecked. Bones lie scattered where the waves meet the rocks, some human, others less easily named. There is no welcome here, no sign of life beyond the grim silhouettes of Druchii overseers waiting to herd them forward. They are driven in columns, bound by neck and wrist, through valleys cut between cliffs that rise like the walls of a prison. Whips crack to keep them moving, each lash a reminder that death is preferable to slowing the pace. The landscape itself mirrors the cruelty of its rulers. Forests of twisted pine loom in silence, their branches like skeletal claws. The ground crunches beneath their feet, a mixture of frost and ash, and the skies above are perpetually clouded, granting no sun to warm them. Naggaroth is a land built for despair, and despair is what the captives begin to breathe. As the days of forced marches continue, some fall by the wayside. The weak, the wounded, the too old or too young to keep pace are left behind, their chains unfastened only so their bodies can be discarded into shallow ditches or heaped upon pyres. The Druchii do not waste effort on those who cannot be used. Yet this too serves their design, for every captive who witnesses such pitiless disposal understands their own worth in this new world. They are no longer people but resources as replaceable as wood or stone. The lesson is repeated with every mile until even the strongest begin to lower their eyes and quicken their steps, desperate to avoid notice. At last the slave caravans reach the cities. The greatest of these is Naggaroth, the city of execution, where the Witch King himself sits upon a throne of endless malice. Its towers pierce the clouds, vast spires of obsidian and iron that blot out the sun. Even at a distance the scale of it is overwhelming, for it is not merely a city but a monument to cruelty. Walls bristle with spikes and sharpened teeth, gates are adorned with the skulls of 1,000 victims, and the air itself trembles with the constant clamor of forges and the screams of the condemned. To enter Naggaroth as a slave is to step into a world where suffering is not incidental, but foundational, where every street and hall is constructed from the bones of the broken. The first hours within the city strip away whatever dignity the captives may have clung to during the voyage. They are paraded through markets where Druchii nobles, clad in robes of silken black, study them as one would examine livestock. The strong are measured for the mines or the forges, their muscles prodded like beasts of burden. The young and comely are singled out for other purposes, whispered over with amusement by noble women whose eyes gleam with cruelty. Those deemed unworthy of labor are sent aside with casual gestures, destined for the arenas or sacrificial altars. All of this occurs with such calm precision that it becomes clear that Druchii have perfected slavery into a ritual as cold and efficient as any military campaign. Those fortunate enough to be purchased for labor are branded. Iron sigils pressed to flesh sear ownership into their very skin, erasing their names and identities. Some weep silently as the mark burns, others scream until their voices fail, but all bear the scars thereafter. For the Druchii it is not enough to chain the body, they must chain the soul. From this moment each captive is no longer a person but an extension of their master's will. The nights in Naggaroth bring no rest. Slaves are crammed into pens of stone and iron, where cold seeps through the walls and straw is often too damp to lie upon. Whispers pass between them, stories of escape, of rebellion, of the gods hearing their prayers, but the city itself seems to devour hope. The cries of others echo from every quarter, a reminder that there is no place beyond reach, no shadow deep enough to hide from Druchii cruelty. Some cling to memory, murmuring names of lost families or lands, but with each passing day even memory begins to fade. What was once life is now only dream, and dreams are dangerous when reality is this cruel. And yet even in this abyss the captives begin to sense that this is but the threshold. The branding, the labor, the mockery, all of it is the surface of something far deeper, for beneath Naggaroth's towering spires lie chambers of ritual and torment, places where slavery ceases to be about work and instead becomes about feeding the very soul of a civilization obsessed with pain. The captives have been brought across seas, stripped of name and home, bound into servitude. Now they are about to discover the true heart of Druchii cruelty, and it is far darker than the chains that bind their limbs. The march into the depths of Naggaroth is not merely a journey through a hostile land, it is the deliberate unmaking of human beings. For those shackled together in the endless caravans, each day blurs into a rhythm of hunger, exhaustion and cruelty. The Druchii drive them onward with whips and jeers, never allowing them to linger, never allowing them to forget their place. Roads here are not true roads at all, but frozen trails beaten into the ice by centuries of slave columns. Each footstep follows another long dead, and each cry of despair echoes cries that were made centuries before. To walk these paths is to join a history written entirely in chains. The land itself conspires with the Druchii. Winter never loosens its grip here, not even in the heart of summer. Winds howl like wolves, stripping warmth from the skin and biting into the marrow. Snow falls in sheets that bury the weak where they stumble, yet no mercy is shown to those who collapse. For the Dark Elves do not halt their march for the fallen. Instead they are left where they fall, the snow covering their bodies as neatly as any grave. In the old world, a dead man might receive a prayer or a cairn of stones. Here in Naggaroth, death is nothing more than discarded flesh. The sight of frozen corpses lining the trail becomes commonplace, a reminder to the living that they too are nothing but fodder for a pitiless empire. Along the way, the captives are fed scraps just sufficient to keep them alive, though rare enough to give them strength. The Druchii understand starvation as an art form. They allow their slaves just enough sustenance to continue walking, to keep breathing, but not enough to resist or to dream of rebellion. A crust of moldy bread here, a sip of fouled water there, these rations become treasures, fought over in whispers and furtive glances. Sometimes, to amuse themselves, the Druchii toss meat into the snow and watch the starving captives crawl upon all fours like beasts to seize it. Those who lunge too slowly are whipped, while those who seize it too greedily are beaten until they cough blood. Hunger is not an accident in Naggaroth. It is a weapon sharpened with precision. The lash is ever present. Overseers walk among the columns with scourges tipped in hooks and barbs, designed not merely to wound but to tear flesh away in ribbons. Every strike is a lesson, every scar a reminder. The overseers seem tireless, their eyes bright with malice, their mouths curving in cruel delight, as they watch the captives stumble and bleed. Among the slaves themselves, trust begins to dissolve. Those desperate for survival will betray companions, whispering names of would-be escapees to their gaolers for a scrap of food or the promise of one fewer lash. Bonds of family fracture under such pressure. A father may avert his eyes as his son is beaten, fearing that a single cry of protest will bring death upon them both. In this way, the Druchii do not only break individuals, they unravel communities, ensuring that unity cannot survive within the chains. Rumors circulate in hushed tones when overseers are far enough away. Some claim that those who survive long enough are destined for Naggaron's forges, where men work until their hands are nothing but raw bone. Others whisper of the gladiatorial pits, where captives are forced to fight each other for the amusement of a jeering crowd, their lives spilling into sand stained red by countless deaths. Still others speak of darker fates, of altars where screams are offered to gods who feast upon agony, where lives are extinguished not in labor but in ritual. None of these stories bring comfort, but in the absence of hope, fear becomes the only compass left. At night, the captives are herded into camps that are nothing more than crude pens of stone or wood, open to the wind and snow. Fires burn only for the Druchii, while the slaves huddle together for warmth, their breath rising in clouds of white mist. Guards watch with bows drawn, and those who dare to close their eyes too deeply risk being dragged out and beaten for perceived idleness. Sleep becomes as dangerous as hunger, and exhaustion weighs heavier with each passing day. Yet still, they march when dawn comes again. They march because the alternative is death. They march because there is no other road. And as the spires of Naggaroth loom closer on the horizon, its towers etched black against the storm-lit sky, the captives begin to understand a truth whispered among them in terror. This march is not leading them toward a destination of labor and survival. It is leading them into a world where cruelty is the foundation of existence itself, where even their pain will not belong to them, but will be consumed, measured, and wielded by their masters as both power and pleasure. The pens are the first true taste of Naggaroth's cruelty. To call them shelters would be to offer a lie. They are little more than cages of stone, iron, and frozen mud, deliberately designed not to protect but to expose. The walls drip with ice, the ground is slick with filth, and the only warmth comes from the press of countless bodies huddled together. Guards circle the pens with torches and whips, their shadows stretching long against the walls, reminding all inside that rest itself is a privilege given only at their whim. For the newly captured, it is here that the final unraveling begins. Upon arrival, the captives are stripped of all possessions. Talismans, trinkets, or heirlooms carried through the march are torn away and tossed into the fire before their eyes. A farmer's crude wooden charm of the lady, a soldier's whetstone gifted by his father, a child's doll carved from bone, each is destroyed in deliberate ritual, erasing the last ties to a world left behind. The Druchii understand that objects carry memory, and that memory carries defiance. By burning these small treasures, they burn fragments of the soul itself. Next comes the branding. Overseers heat irons in great braziers until they glow white, then press them into flesh. Screams rise into the night as names are burned away and replaced with marks of ownership, sigils that proclaim the slave's role and master. The smell of scorched skin fills the air, mingling with smoke and snow, a scent that lingers in the nostrils long after the pain fades. Some faint beneath the iron, others bite their lips until blood flows, refusing to give their captors the satisfaction of a cry. Yet all bear the mark thereafter, and all feel the truth of it. Whatever they once were, Bretonnian, Imperial, Tillian, they are now only Druchii property. The pens quickly become arenas of despair. Guards drag individuals out at random for lessons. A man who dares to look too long at an overseer is beaten before the rest until his face is unrecognizable. A woman who whispers prayers is forced to kneel in the snow while her tongue is cut from her mouth. A child who weeps too loudly is silenced forever, her body left in the mud as a warning. Each act of cruelty is public, staged before the others to instill fear. In time, the captives learn to lower their eyes, to silence their voices, to still their movements until they resemble little more than shadows of themselves. What begins as physical submission soon festers into the mind. The Druchii whisper poison into the ears of their captives, mocking their gods, deriding their homelands, sneering at the futility of human life. Sigmar is dead, some say, or he never was. The lady drinks your tears, others jeer. Every word is calculated to gnaw at belief, to plant doubt where faith once stood. For the Druchii know that chains alone are not enough. A chained man with hope can still resist. A man without hope is already theirs. Among the captives themselves, desperation breeds betrayal. Some, broken more quickly than others, begin to curry favor with their masters. They report whispers of defiance, point out those who share bread in secret, or name companions who plot escape. In return, they are rewarded with a scrap of food, a less painful lash, a night untroubled by torture. These small mercies are enough to sow division, and soon trust evaporates. A father may eye his neighbor with suspicion, a sister may fear her brother's whispered promise of rebellion. The Druchii watch all of this with cold amusement, for they know that slaves who cannot trust one another will never unite. Yet in rare moments, humanity clings stubbornly to life. A mother sings a lullaby through cracked lips, her voice hoarse but steady, soothing her child in the bitter cold. An old soldier mutters half-forgotten prayers to Moor, his voice trembling but still defiant, refusing to yield his soul to silence. These sparks do not go unnoticed. Sometimes the Druchii extinguish them cruelly, dragging the singers or mutterers away to be made examples. Other times they allow them to linger, knowing that even hope can be turned into a weapon when it is crushed at the right moment. For many, the pens are not a place of waiting, but of transformation. Here men and women cease to be individuals. They are broken into shapes more useful to their masters: laborers, gladiators, sacrifices. Identity is peeled away layer by layer until what remains is not a person but a role. In this way, the march does not end at the gates of Naggaroth. It continues within the mind, a march from self to silence, from defiance to obedience, from life to shadow. And as the days stretch into weeks, and the screams of the branded echo like hymns in the frozen night, the captives begin to realize that they are no longer walking toward a future. They are being remade for a purpose none of them yet understand. For the Druchii are not content to own their bodies. They seek to harvest their very souls, and Naggaroth itself will serve as the crucible for that terrible alchemy. When the overseers decide that the captives have been sufficiently broken, the true sorting begins. The pens are emptied in groups, each line herded beneath the watchful eyes of the Black Guard and the cruel laughter of the Druchii noble caste. To the captives, it is a spectacle of judgment. To their masters, it is no more than the arranging of tools. The air is filled with the sound of chains clinking, whips cracking, and the hollow calls of names long since forgotten. Each life is weighed not by its humanity, but by its usefulness. The strongest are claimed first. Broad-shouldered men and women, hardened by war or toil, are dragged from the lines to serve as gladiators. Shackled together, they are led toward the arenas of Harganath and Clark-Carond, where their strength will be pitted against beast and blade for the amusement of Druchii crowds. Some are thrown spears or axes, others left with bare fists, their survival a game played for the cruel laughter of their masters. Few last long, but those who do become prized, forced to kill again and again until their eyes are as hollow as the trophies mounted upon the walls. The next chosen are the laborers. These are the ones of stout frame but little spirit, men who once swung hammers in the forges of Nuln, women who ploughed fields beneath Bretonnian suns, youths with backs unbent by age. They are chained in groups and marched to the quarries, mines and shipyards of Naggaroth, where they will haul stone until their bodies fail, or dig until the earth itself swallows them. Overseers drive them with whips, and those who stumble are trampled beneath the boots of their companions, their corpses left unburied in the frozen soil. The mines echo not only with the sound of picks, but with the ceaseless groans of the damned. The smallest and weakest are taken last, though their fate is often the cruelest. Children, the elderly and the sickly are rarely spared. Some are chosen for sacrifice, their blood spilled upon altars to Cain-D, the Lord of Murder, their hearts torn out as offerings to feed Naggaroth's insatiable hunger for pain. Others are fed to beasts, thrown into pits with hydras, manticores, or black dragons, their screams a chorus of entertainment. A few are kept alive only to serve as playthings for the cruelest of Druchii nobles, who delight in bending fragile lives until they snap. For the women of the pens there is an added torment. Many are taken into households as servants, not out of kindness but as ornaments of humiliation. They are paraded through halls, forced to wear collars of iron and silk, displayed as trophies of conquest. At night their masters use them as they please, breaking them with a different kind of cruelty that leaves scars no whip can carve. Rumors whisper that some are offered to the brides of Cain, trained in the cult's shadowed temples until they too become blades of ritual murder. The division of fates is deliberate, a lesson to those who remain, to see one's neighbor taken to the mines, another dragged screaming to the altars, another bound for the arena. This is the final severing of community. No longer do the captives share a single destiny. Each path is a separate chain, isolating them even from each other. In this way, the Druchii transform a host of prisoners into fragments of despair, scattering them across Naggaroth like ashes in the wind. Yet, despite this meticulous cruelty, small fires of resistance flicker in the darkness. Some laborers form whispered brotherhoods, trading scraps of bread beneath watchful eyes. A few gladiators fight not for the amusement of their captors but for the memory of those they lost, their victories silent acts of defiance even as they are forced to kneel for cheers they despise. Among the condemned sacrifices some march to the altar singing hymns to their gods, spitting defiance even as the knife descends. These moments do not change their fates, but they preserve something vital, something the Druchii cannot extinguish completely, the knowledge that even in chains, even in torment, there remains a choice to resist. But resistance in Naggaroth is always fleeting. For every whisper of courage there is a lash of punishment. For every act of defiance there is a retribution multiplied tenfold. And so the cycle continues, until the survivors are shaped into the forms the Druchii desire, their individuality erased, their humanity twisted into roles that serve only to uphold the empire of cruelty. What began with capture has become transformation, and what remains ahead is worse still. For beyond the mines, beyond the arenas, beyond the altars, there lies a deeper horror, the integration of the slave into the very fabric of Naggaroth's society. They are not merely prisoners. They are the foundation upon which the Druchii build their empire, and in time even their screams will become part of its song. Over time the horror of Naggaroth ceases to feel like an interruption of life, and instead becomes life itself. The captives who endure long enough find themselves woven into the machinery of Druchii society, not as people but as threads of suffering that bind the whole. A fortress rises upon stone carried by the backs of the enslaved, its walls gleaming with malice as though mocking the countless corpses buried beneath its foundations. A fleet sets sail from Naggaroth, each warship crafted from timber felled by human hands, every nail hammered by those who will never see the seas they have served. Even the most ordinary luxuries of Druchii nobility, jewels, silks, goblets of dark wine, are purchased through the torment of slaves who mined the stones, wove the cloth, or harvested the fields under whips that never tire. This normalization of cruelty is deliberate. Among the Druchii, no banquet is complete without slaves to pour the wine, no hunt without slaves to carry the spears, no triumph without slaves to adorn the procession. The agony of others is the very backdrop of their existence. Children of noble houses grow accustomed to it before they can speak, playing games with captives as one might with animals, their laughter bright against the cries of those tormented. The brutality is not hidden, nor is it exceptional. It is simply the rhythm of Naggaroth, as steady as the tide, as certain as winter. For the enslaved, this realization carves deep wounds in the spirit. They come to see that their suffering is not a tragedy noticed by the gods, nor a temporary misfortune that might someday pass. It is expected. It is perpetual. Each act of labor, each drop of blood spilled, sustains not only the power of their masters, but the very identity of the Druchii themselves. The cruel truth dawns slowly but without mercy. To live in Naggaroth as a slave is not to endure for rescue or for return. It is to endure so that others may revel in your endurance, so that your pain may sing in the chorus of their empire. And yet even here, even within this normalization of torment, faint echoes of defiance persist. Some slaves cling to their gods, whispering prayers in tongues foreign to the frozen land. Others hold to memory, repeating the names of villages, rivers, or meadows so they will not be forgotten even when spoken only in chains. A few take solace in small acts unseen, sharing a crust of bread, steadying a companion's burden, meeting another's eyes with silent recognition that though they are treated as cattle, they are still human. These are not victories the Druchii would ever notice, but to the enslaved, they are sparks in the dark, fragments of identity that refuse to die. As the years pass, survivors of the pens are no longer newcomers. They become part of the living tapestry of Naggaroth, familiar faces to one another, strangers to themselves. They are the voices that echo in the quarries, the hands that bleed in the shipyards, the shadows that kneel in the courts of noble masters. Their names are gone, their histories consumed, but their endurance continues, a quiet resistance that neither lash nor brand can wholly erase. And it is here, within this silence, that the true story of survival begins. For in the endless cruelty of Naggaroth, survival itself becomes both a rebellion and a burden. The captives learn that to live is to carry memory, to bear witness, to endure not for themselves but for those who cannot. It is not freedom, nor even hope, but something more stubborn, more defiant, a truth that even the Druchii cannot extinguish. And this truth will carry us forward into the next chapter of their lives, where survival is no longer measured by chains or scars, but by the quiet fire of endurance that flickers in the shadow of despair. To survive in Naggaroth is to learn how to breathe beneath ice. Life does not end in the pens, it stretches onward, stripped of freedom yet heavy with the demand to endure. The enslaved awaken each day to the same iron routines, the crack of the whip, the bark of orders in a tongue not their own, the bitter wind clawing through the cracks of their hovels. What follows is toil without pause, each moment shaped by the will of masters who see them not as lives but as extensions of tools. Yet amid this ceaseless torment, patterns emerge, rhythms of existence that hold despair at bay by a thread. Labor is the heartbeat of survival. Slaves are divided into tasks so vast and unending that they appear to mirror the land itself. Some are chained in long lines to haul blocks of obsidian from the quarries, the stone destined to become the cruel towers of Naggaroth. Their shoulders bear grooves where the yoke bites, skin rubbed raw until flesh tears and bone feels exposed. Others toil in the shipyards of Naggaroth, their hands blistered by rope and iron, as they heave timbers into place for the black fleets that prowl the seas. Still others dig through frozen earth in mines so deep that light never reaches, breathing stale air thick with dust and despair until lungs collapse beneath the weight of it. In every place the labor is designed not merely to build but to break, to wear down body and spirit alike until survival itself seems a kind of rebellion. Food is scarce, a weapon as sharp as any blade. Overseers dole out rations with the cruelty of priests bestowing sacraments, each scrap of bread or ladle of gruel determining who will see another day. Hunger gnaws constantly, leaving men hollow-eyed and women gaunt, reducing once proud warriors to desperate creatures licking frost from stone. Yet even here, rituals of sharing emerge. A mother will push her crust into the hands of her child, ignoring her own growling stomach. Companions will trade sips of thin broth, each sacrificing a little so that none perish outright. Such gestures carry no promise of salvation, but they bind the enslaved together, forming fragile communities in the shadow of despair. Punishment is a constant presence, hovering like a storm that never breaks. Whips fall for hesitation, blades draw blood for disobedience, and entire groups are executed when one slave dares to resist. The Druchii wield cruelty with precision, ensuring that fear is not only felt but remembered. Survivors carry scars that are more than wounds. They are reminders etched into flesh that defiance will always cost more than obedience. Yet paradoxically, these same scars become marks of endurance, quiet testimonies that the flesh, though broken, still lives. Some slaves trace their scars in silence at night, as though reminding themselves that survival, however bitter, remains possible. What grants meaning to this existence is not the labor or the hunger, but the fragments of memory that endure despite it all. A peasant might whisper the names of fields long lost, recalling the smell of barley at harvest beneath the summer sun. An imperial soldier may recount to himself the oath he once swore to Sigmar, a promise now mocked by circumstance but still clung to with desperate faith. A Bretonian woman might close her eyes and picture the lady's reflection in a pool, though she knows she will never kneel before such waters again. These memories are fragile, eroded by years of suffering, yet they are stronger than chains. They remind the enslaved that they are more than their captors believe. In the frozen dark of Naggaroth, even ritual becomes a weapon against despair. Some slaves carve secret marks into stone, sigils not of chaos but of home, a hidden language that speaks of defiance and remembrance. Others hum lullabies from distant lands, songs so faint that they blend with the wind, unnoticed by their masters yet heard by those who huddle beside them. A few gather at night to whisper prayers to gods whose silence feels endless, voices trembling as they call to Mor, to Tal, to Sigmar, or to the Lady. Whether those gods listen or not does not matter. The act of prayer itself becomes survival, a stubborn refusal to surrender the soul entirely. But survival in Naggaroth is never only a matter of spirit. It demands cunning, a willingness to bend without breaking. Slaves learn to mask their eyes, to move with the rhythm of obedience while hiding sparks of rebellion deep within. They become adept at silence, knowing when to speak and when to bow their heads, when to yield to cruelty and when to conceal strength for another day. To live too boldly is to die swiftly, but to live too meekly is to be erased altogether. Balance is everything, enough submission to survive, enough resistance to remain human. And in this fragile balance lies the truth of their existence. They do not live as free men and women, yet they do not die as cattle. They occupy the narrow space between despair and defiance, sustained by hunger, memory, ritual, and sheer endurance. Naggaroth seeks to unmake them, to forge them into shadows of obedience. Yet every breath they take, every scar they carry, every whispered prayer they refuse to silence, is proof that though they are bound, they are not broken. Among the countless cruelties of Naggaroth, perhaps the most insidious is isolation. The Druchii know that unity breeds strength, and so they work tirelessly to sow suspicion and division, rewarding betrayal and punishing solidarity. Yet even in the frozen heart of that empire, bonds still form, delicate as spider silk, yet resilient enough to endure the weight of chains. It is through these bonds that many slaves find the strength to survive, for companionship offers a kind of defiance that no whip can wholly erase. In the mines where the darkness swallows all light, voices become lifelines. A man will whisper his name to another, not the name his master calls him, but the name he carried from his homeland, trusting that it will not be betrayed. In this way, identities survive in secret, passed like smuggled treasures between weary hands. A Bretonnian knight stripped of his armor might trade stories with an imperial farmer, discovering that their suffering is shared even if their worlds once stood apart. Such exchanges kindle fragile alliances, and within those alliances a sense of dignity that refuses to die. In the shipyards, where bodies strain against ropes and timber, companionship is forged through labor itself. A man who steadies another's burden, a woman who lends her strength to lift a fallen beam. These gestures create a rhythm of solidarity that cannot be entirely stamped out. Overseers see only the ships rising from the sea's edge, but beneath the hammer blows and the groaning timbers there exists a current of quiet cooperation, a shared recognition that survival is never solitary. The Druchii may brand and lash, but they cannot wholly sever the instinct to lean upon one another. At night, within the hovels where the enslaved huddle for warmth, small communities take shape. Children cling to surrogate parents, elders recount fragments of memory, and the strong place themselves between the weak and the wrath of the guards. Some share rituals of their homelands, Tilians whispering fragments of old songs, Kislevites tracing runes of protection in the dirt, Bretonnians murmuring prayers to the lady beneath their breath. These acts are fragile and easily crushed, yet they offer a thread of continuity, binding the enslaved not just to each other but to a world beyond their chains. There are those who betray, of course. Survival sometimes demands it, and hunger gnaws more sharply than loyalty. A man may point out the hidden bread shared by a neighbor in exchange for an extra scrap of food, or a woman may whisper the names of those who dare speak against their masters to earn a night free from the lash. These betrayals wound more deeply than any blade, for they unravel the trust that is the lifeblood of endurance. Yet even here, bonds endure. For every traitor who kneels to cruelty, there is another who shelters a child, shares a secret prayer, or risks punishment to steady a faltering companion. The Druchii may exploit weakness, but they cannot wholly extinguish loyalty. Perhaps most poignant are the friendships born of despair, fragile alliances between those who know they will never see freedom but refuse to die alone. In whispered conversations beneath the stars, two slaves may exchange dreams, not of escape, but of memory, one recalling the taste of Kislevite vodka on a winter's night, the other the scent of Bretonnian roses in spring. These memories become gifts, traded like precious stones, treasures that the Druchii can neither burn nor brand away. Through them the enslaved build invisible sanctuaries, places of warmth that exist only in the mind but sustain the spirit nonetheless. And yet, even bonds carry danger. To care for another is to offer a weapon to the Druchii, who delight in exploiting affection. They will threaten the child to break the parent, torment the friend to force confession, pit companions against one another until loyalty itself becomes a wound. In this way, survival demands a terrible balance: to draw strength from others without giving the masters a blade to use against you. Some succeed, keeping bonds hidden like smoldering coals beneath ash. Others fail, their love or loyalty turned into shackles more binding than iron. Still, despite the peril, bonds persist. They are fragile, fleeting, and often tragic, yet they are also proof that even in the frozen empire of cruelty, humanity endures. The enslaved of Naggaroth survive not only through labor and cunning, but through the quiet defiance of connection, the refusal to be alone in their suffering. In every whispered name, in every shard of bread shared, in every memory traded beneath the stars, there lies a spark that no overseer can wholly extinguish. And it is these sparks, scattered and hidden, that illuminate the path forward in the endless night of bondage. When flesh grows numb from cold and the lash becomes a daily hymn, it is not strength of body that keeps the enslaved alive, but the stories they whisper in the dark. Faith becomes a currency more precious than bread, superstition a balm more potent than any salve, and myth a fire that flickers even when hope is ground to ash. In the shadow of Naggaroth, where cruelty is the law and despair the foundation, belief becomes both a lifeline and a battlefield. Many cling to the gods of their homelands. Imperial captives whisper prayers to Sigmar, begging their patron to grant them the strength to endure one more day beneath the yoke. Bretonnians murmur invocations to the Lady of the Lake, though her sacred waters lie far across the seas, hidden from eyes that will never kneel before her again. Talians cry out to Myrmidia, goddess of strategy and honor, though the order she represents seems a cruel jest beneath the chaos of the lash. Kislevite voices tremble with prayers to Ursun, begging the bear god for warmth in the frozen dark. Each prayer carries the weight of desperation, but also defiance, the insistence that even here, even in Naggaroth, their gods still hear them. Yet the silence that follows these prayers is heavy. The gods do not answer. No miracle shatters the chains. No divine fire strikes the overseers dead. For some, this silence is proof of abandonment, the cruel revelation that no higher power watches over them. These souls grow hollow, their faith drained as surely as their strength, until they bow their heads and accept that no salvation will come. For others, the silence is not absence but test, a trial of endurance meant to prove the resilience of the faithful. Such slaves march to the mines with whispered psalms upon their lips, their prayers as stubborn as the frost that gnaws their bones. Superstition takes root where faith falters. Some slaves mutter that to survive a day without punishment, one must smear ash upon the brow before dawn. Others claim that carving symbols of more into the dirt wards off the eyes of the executioner, or that humming a child's lullaby confuses the attention of Cain's brides. These beliefs may seem desperate, even absurd, yet they offer structure, a sense that the chaos of Naggaroth can be navigated if only one obeys hidden rules. And when such rituals appear to work, even once, they spread like wildfire through the hovels and mines, giving captives a fragile map through an otherwise merciless existence. There are darker whispers still, for some captives turn their fear into appeasement of the very gods of Naggaroth. In the frozen pits there are those who mutter prayers not to Sigmar or Myrmidia, but to Cain himself, begging the Lord of Murder to spare them in exchange for blood spilled in his name. Others whisper of the Witch King Malekith, not as enemy but as a figure of inevitability, a shadow whose dominion must be endured rather than resisted. Such capitulations are rare, for they carry a stench of betrayal, yet in the face of endless cruelty, even loyalty to darkness can feel like survival. But perhaps the most haunting faith is not in gods at all, but in myth. Tales are whispered of Sigmar's promised return, of the lady's hidden hand guiding even the lost, of Mor opening his gates not as punishment, but as mercy to those who perish in chains. Some believe that one day the seas will part and armies from the old world will storm the shores of Naggaroth, toppling the towers of the Druchii and freeing the enslaved. Others whisper of darker endings, that Nagash will rise once more and bind all souls, slave and master alike, into an eternity of servitude that makes Naggaroth's chains seem merciful. These myths cannot be proven, yet they endure because they give shape to suffering. They transform endless torment into a story, one with an end beyond the whip and the mine. Whether the end is salvation or doom matters less than the act of believing, for belief itself becomes resistance, a refusal to let the Druchii write the only story of their lives. In this way, faith and superstition bind the enslaved as surely as chains, but unlike chains, they offer the possibility of meaning. In the silence of the pens, when the guard's laughter fades and the cold gnaws deepest, it is faith that fills the air. Voices murmur in a dozen tongues, prayers rising and overlapping, myths whispered like lullabies, superstitions passed like secret codes. These sounds do not reach the ears of the Druchii, who sleep within their towers drunk on wine and cruelty, but among the enslaved, they are a chorus, fragile and trembling yet unbroken, a chorus that insists, against all evidence, that humanity endures even in the land of shadows. Faith sustains the heart, memory preserves the soul, and bonds protect the spirit, but none of these are enough on their own. To survive for years beneath the shadow of the Druchii requires something colder, something sharper. It requires cunning. The enslaved of Naggaroth soon learn that brute strength falters and open defiance leads only to execution. Yet beneath the lash and brand they carve out slivers of control through careful observation, quiet deception, and the art of appearing broken while remaining unbowed. The first lesson is in silence. Words are currency, and careless ones are more dangerous than any blade. Those who talk too freely of rebellion are betrayed within hours, dragged away screaming as their companions are forced to watch. Those who boast of courage find themselves tested by cruelty designed to break them before all others. The cunning slave learns when to bow the head, when to murmur obedience, and when to let silence guard thoughts too dangerous to share. It is not cowardice, but the careful armor of survival, the mask that allows one to endure until an unseen tomorrow. The second lesson is in service. To catch the overseer's eye is dangerous, but to vanish completely is worse. A slave who proves too fragile is discarded without thought, while one who shows defiance is broken with relish. The cunning find the narrow line between these fates, offering enough obedience to appear useful, but not enough to draw envy or suspicion. They carry burdens without complaint, yet stumble just enough to avoid being seen as strong. They kneel quickly, yet not so eagerly that they draw the jealousy of those beside them. It is a delicate balance, a performance rehearsed each day in the theater of cruelty. The third lesson lies in observation. Overseers are not gods, and their malice has patterns. The lash falls most harshly in the early hours when wine still clouds the mind. Punishments are swiftest when masters quarrel among themselves, their fury redirected upon those beneath them. To notice such rhythms is to carve out pockets of safety, to move when the guard looks away, to whisper prayers when laughter covers the sound, to hide bread beneath the straw at the moment discipline slackens. These are not victories in the grand sense, but they are victories enough to see another dawn. And then there are the rarest, those who weave cunning not merely for themselves but for others. The woman who spills water upon her own dress to hide the stolen crust in her child's hand. The man who feigns collapse to distract a guard while his companion buries a mark of home into the quarry wall. The elder who tells a story so long that the young forget their hunger, if only for a night. These acts are not rebellion in the open sense. They do not topple towers or slay masters. Yet they are the marrow of resistance, quiet affirmations that even within bondage humanity can choose to act for more than survival alone. Of course, cunning carries its own risks. Too much silence breeds suspicion. Too much subtlety invites scrutiny, and when discovered, deceit is punished with a cruelty designed to teach all others the futility of guile. A hidden loaf of bread may cost a man his tongue. A whispered prayer may see a woman's hand nailed to a post. Yet despite this, the enslaved continue their quiet games of survival, for the alternative is to become truly broken, to live without even the hope of agency. Better to risk the lash with a secret act of will than to surrender entirely to despair. And so the enslaved of Naggaroth endure not only through bonds or faith, but through the razor's edge of cunning. It is not glorious, and it is never without pain, but it grants them a measure of defiance within the vast machinery of cruelty. In this way, survival itself becomes an art form, a balance of silence, obedience, observation, and secret rebellion. The Druchii may see only shadows of submission in their pens and quarries, but beneath that surface lives a hidden resistance, fragile yet indomitable. With every whispered prayer, every hidden crust, every glance of solidarity disguised as obedience, the enslaved shape a quiet defiance that lingers. It is this defiance that carries them forward into the years of bondage, into the deeper horrors of Naggaroth where survival alone is no longer enough. For as the chains grow heavier and the years stretch on, the question is no longer how to endure, but what endurance itself means. And that question leads us to the widening horizon of their fate, into legends and terrors that touch upon the very soul of the old world. The life of a slave beneath the towers of Naggaroth may seem like an isolated torment, a world reduced to lash, frost, and hunger. Yet the old world itself is never absent, its great storms of history sweeping across even the darkest corners. For the enslaved, chains are not only forged by their Druchii masters, but also by the broader tides of gods, legends and powers whose reach extends across continents and centuries. To live in bondage in Naggaroth is to feel the weight of forces far beyond one's own chains, to be caught in currents that swirl between myth and apocalypse. It begins with the shadow of chaos. For though the Druchii delight in cruelty, they are but one fragment of a greater storm, a storm that spills from the north in endless waves of mutation and fire. In the frozen mines and coastal holds, slaves whisper of the chaos wastes, of tribes who worship the ruinous powers with such fervor that their very bodies twist into monstrous forms. These are not distant legends but realities that touch the enslaved directly, For when chaos warbands descend upon the old world, more captives are taken, more lives swept across the seas into Druchii hands. To a Bretonnian or Rakelander prisoner, the lash in Naggaroth is not only a Druchii punishment, but also the echo of chaos itself. For without that eternal tide of destruction, their capture may never have come to pass. The enslaved whisper too of darker figures, champions who stride from the wastes clad in armor blackened by sorcery, their names carried like curses across oceans. Archakon is one such name, spoken with terror even in the cold pens of Naggaroth. Few know the truth of his destiny, but many sense that he is more than a warlord, that his rise heralds an end not only for empires but for the world itself. To the slaves such rumors are both dread and bitter hope. If Archakon truly means to bring the end times, then perhaps even their suffering will not endure forever. Perhaps Naggaroth itself, with its whips and towers, will be swept away in the storm. Yet the thought brings no comfort, for an ending born of chaos promises no freedom, only annihilation. But chaos is not the only spectre that haunts the enslaved. In the darkness of the pens some whisper of the dead. Nagash's name surfaces in broken voices, often little more than a mutter before silence falls, as though the mere sound of it might invite his gaze. They speak of Sylvania, of the von Carstains, and their legions of restless corpses, and wonder whether the fate of Naggaroth's slaves is truly worse than an eternity, as one of the unliving. To many it is a question without answer. The Druchii offer torment without end, but undeath offers no end at all. Which is crueler? To suffer for decades before dying forgotten, or to march forever in a silent army, one's soul bound to the will of a necromancer? The Druchii themselves offer no clarity, for their priests weave their own grim narratives. The cults of Cain proclaim that all blood shed beneath their whips is sacred, that every scream feeds their god's endless hunger. Slaves become unwilling participants in a cosmic ritual of slaughter, their pain a tithe to a deity who thrives upon it. And in Naggaroth, where blood runs freely, it is easy to believe that Cain's hand is always near, his thirst never slaked. The cult's presence turns every moment of suffering into a fragment of divine worship, a thought more chilling than the lash itself. And yet, amid these vast myths, there is still the flicker of peasant superstition. Captives murmur that Sigmar will return, walking once more among men to shatter chains and smite the wicked. They whisper that the Lady of the Lake has not abandoned her children, that her waters flow even unseen in foreign lands. Some even claim that Mor himself guides the dying into his realm with gentler hands when they perish in chains, as though the god of death shows mercy where no mortal will. These are not certainties, but they are lifelines. For to believe that their torment is not the whole of reality, that powers greater than the Druchii still stir in the world, is to carve a measure of defiance even when surrounded by cruelty. It is here, between the lash of the Druchii and the shadow of the great powers, that the enslaved find themselves poised. They are pawns in a game they cannot see, bound within a struggle between gods, mortals, and legends whose movements shake continents. To them the lash is real, the frost is real, the hunger is real, but behind those immediate sufferings looms a truth they cannot escape, that their fate is bound not only to the cruelty of their masters but to the tides of myth and apocalypse that ripple across the old world. And as these tides grow stronger, as rumors of chaos and whispers of undead rise louder, the enslaved cannot help but wonder, are they forgotten entirely, or do their chains bind them into the same fate awaiting all the world? If the whispers of chaos and Nagash's shadow shape the fears of the enslaved, it is the figure of Malekith, the Witch King, that defines the horizon of their reality. To the Druchii he is no mere ruler, but the axis upon which their entire existence turns, a being whose cruelty is as much destiny as choice. To the slaves, his presence is less personal yet no less suffocating. His name is seldom spoken aloud in the pens, for it carries with it a weight of inevitability, the reminder that their torment is not simply the whim of individual overseers, but the expression of a grander, darker will. The myths of Malekith are as numerous as the cracks in Naggaroth's glaciers. Some say he is eternal, his body held together by sorcery older than empires, his rage smoldering since the day the flames of Ashurian scarred him. Others claim he cannot die, for he has bound his fate to that of Naggaroth itself, that while the towers stand and the seas crash upon the black coast, Malekith's shadow will endure. To the enslaved, such stories bring despair, for they whisper that there is no end to their bondage so long as the Witch King rules. Yet despair is not the only emotion his myths inspire. For some, the thought that one man could bear the weight of so much cruelty turns him into more than a tyrant. He becomes a figure of awe, a dark mirror of gods themselves, proof that mortals may ascend into something more than flesh. Among the Druchii, Malekith's legend is wielded like a blade. Overseers snarl that their cruelty is sanctioned by the Witch King, that each act of torment is not only permitted but blessed by his will. Priests of Cain go further, proclaiming that Malekith's reign is the fulfillment of divine prophecy, that his path of blood is not chosen but ordained. To resist then is to resist not merely a master but fate itself. In such proclamations the suffering of slaves is rendered meaningless, their cries woven into a larger narrative of destiny that leaves no room for pity or defiance. Yet myths are never unchallenged, even in Naggaroth. Among the enslaved, stories surface in whispers that Malekith is cursed, that the flames which scarred him were not a mark of divine judgment endured, but of rejection. They murmur that he was never chosen to lead, that his claim to godhood is a lie built upon the bones of thousands. Such tales are dangerous to voice, yet they spread in the darkest hours, carried by those desperate to believe that even the Witch King's power may one day fail. These stories speak of downfall, of cracks in the eternal shadow, of a tyrant who bleeds as all mortals bleed. The Druchii themselves, for all their cruelty, are not free of doubt. In the towers of Naggaroth, rival cults vie for dominance, some whispering that Malekith's reign is but a prelude to something greater, others muttering that his grip tightens only because he fears what stirs in the north. For the slaves forced to serve in such halls, these whispers are as intoxicating as they are perilous. To hear a master speak with even the faintest doubt is to glimpse the possibility that the Witch King's shadow is not infinite. It is a dangerous hope, but a hope nonetheless. Malekith's myths shape the enslaved in subtler ways as well. His scars, always spoken of in tones of awe or fear, remind them of endurance, of a body so broken yet sustained by will alone. To those who suffer beneath the lash, this becomes a bitter mirror. If even the Witch King can live through flame and agony without yielding, can they not endure one more day, one more wound, one more moment of hunger? It is a cruel inversion, but in a world where stories become survival, even the image of their tormentor becomes twisted into a source of strength. In this way, Malekith becomes more than a distant sovereign. He is a figure of myth that saturates every moment of the enslaved life, his shadow falling upon every chain, every lash, every whispered prayer. He is at once tyrant, god, curse, and mirror, and as his presence endures, the enslaved cannot help but ask themselves if even the Witch King is bound by prophecy. Are they too not bound by some larger fate? Are their chains the will of men, or the design of gods? Even if the Witch King's shadow did not fall across every chain, the enslaved would still know another master, one older and less merciful than any ruler. That master is Naggaroth itself, a land so hostile that it devours both the weak and the strong with equal hunger. For the captives dragged across the seas, the land is no mere backdrop to their torment, but a constant force shaping every breath, every step, every thought of survival. The first lesson Naggaroth teaches is cold. Not the chill of a winter's night in the Empire or the frost of a Bretonnian field, but a cold so vast and unrelenting that it seeps into bone and marrow. It is a cold that makes fire seem like a fragile lie, a cold that steals words from lips and turns tears to crystals before they fall. Slaves working the quarries find their breath freezing in their throats, while those chained in the forest stumble through snow so deep it swallows men whole. Overseers need not always raise the lash, for the land itself punishes with equal cruelty. Those too slow to adapt are found stiff and pale come dawn, claimed not by the Druchii but by Naggaroth's endless frost. Then there are the storms. Across the black coast, lightning tears the skies with such fury that even towers of black stone quake. The sea crashes with waves taller than city walls, and the air is filled with the roar of winds that strip flesh from bone. To be marched along those cliffs as a slave is to know that death waits on either side, the lash behind and the abyss before. Many captives are lost, not to steel but to the storm, their bodies dashed upon rocks or swept into the howling sea. The Druchii call such deaths wasteful, the land calls them inevitable. The forests of Naggaroth offer no mercy either. Their trees, black-barked and twisted, rise like spears, their roots clutching the earth as though strangling it. Beasts lurk among them, creatures warped by shadow and cold, their eyes glowing with hunger. Slaves sent to cut wood or hunt for their masters do so with the knowledge that they may never return, that the land itself conspires to devour them. For every lash that strikes within the pens, there is a claw waiting in the dark beyond. In Naggaroth, no place is safe. Even the silence of the land carries cruelty. In the wastes that stretch beyond the towers there are valleys where no bird sings, no wind stirs, and no sound dares to linger. To march through such places in chains is to feel swallowed by nothingness, to sense that the world itself has abandoned you. Many captives whisper that these lands are cursed, that the silence is not absence but presence, a watchful void that waits patiently for all living things to stumble and fall into its embrace. Whether true or not, the silence gnaws at them as surely as hunger, reminding them that even without overseers the land of Naggaroth itself seeks their end. And yet, as with the Witch King, even this merciless land becomes a kind of mirror. For those who endure its cold and storms and forests, there is a grim pride. If they can survive Naggaroth's cruelty, then perhaps they are not as broken as the Druchii would believe. Every dawn greeted despite the frost, every night survived despite the storms becomes a victory, however small. The land that seeks to break them also forges them, tempering their endurance until it becomes something harder than steel. In this way, Naggaroth itself becomes part of the mythology of survival. To live another day is not merely to endure slavery, but to triumph over a land that even its masters respect and fear. For while the Druchii wield the lash, they too build their towers high and their walls thick, knowing that the land waits outside with teeth bared. In that knowledge lies a quiet kinship between captive and captor, though it is never spoken. Both are bound by the same merciless master, both must bow to the endless cruelty of Naggaroth. And so the enslaved carry within them the dual burden of whip and wilderness, lash and frost, master and land. It is not only chains that bind them, but the geography itself, the storms, the silence, the eternal cold. To live in Naggaroth is to live beneath two tyrannies, one of flesh and one of earth, and in that double yoke, the enslaved begin to wonder if their fate is not merely the cruelty of men, but the will of the world itself. When the lash bites, when the frost freezes lungs and storms sweep away bodies, survival narrows into the space of a heartbeat. Yet even in such immediacy, the enslaved cannot escape the shadow of greater questions. For all around them, the old world trembles with forces that suggest their suffering is not isolated, but part of something far larger, something destined to decide the fate of every living soul. In the pens of Naggaroth, amid whispers and superstition, this thought becomes both a torment and a fragile thread of meaning. Rumors drift across the seas with every new wave of captives. Some speak of Archaon rising in the north, his banners drawing tribes like moths to flame, his name carried on the winds as though the world itself anticipates his march. Others bring tales of Sylvania, where the von Carstens rise again and corpses stir in endless legions. Still others whisper of strange visions among the lizard men of Lustria, of prophecies carved in stone that speak of cycles ending and beginnings that bring no dawn. To the slaves of Naggaroth, these are not mere stories but fragments of a vast tapestry, glimpses of a storm that one day may sweep even their masters from their frozen towers. Some find in this horizon a bitter hope. If chaos truly means to end the world, then even Naggaroth's cruelty must one day crumble into ash. The Witch King's throne, the lash of the overseer, the black towers clawing against the sky, all would be swept away in the flood. Better annihilation, they think, than endless chains. Others recoil from such thoughts, for to imagine the end of the world is to imagine the death of kin and homeland, to surrender even the fragile hope that one day they might walk free in the lands of their birth. Between these poles of despair and defiance lies the fragile truth. They do not know which fate awaits, only that their torment is part of a greater storm. Among the Druchii themselves this horizon is felt as well. The cults of Khan whisper that Naggaroth's endless bloodletting is preparation for the great feast, the offering that will herald the final wars of gods and men. Others proclaim that Malekith's reign is but a pause before his true destiny, that his scars and fury mark him as a figure destined to stand at the heart of whatever ending comes. And though the enslaved may not understand the subtleties of such prophecy, they feel its weight nonetheless. For every sacrifice, every ritual, every invocation of divine murder reinforces the sense that their lives are not merely wasted, but consumed by a purpose beyond their knowing. The land itself seems to echo this looming end. The storms grow harsher, the winters longer, the silence deeper. To those who labor beneath the frozen skies, it feels as though Naggaroth itself is preparing for something vast, as though the very earth waits for a final reckoning. Captives whisper that the frost will one day never break, that the seas will remain frozen forever, that the sun will fail to rise. Whether these are omens or simply despair turned into prophecy, none can say, yet they linger, growing louder with every year that passes. And so the enslaved live not only with the torment of their chains, but with the knowledge or the fear that their lives are bound into a story far greater than themselves. They are not forgotten fragments, not isolated sufferers, but unwilling threads woven into the same fabric as kings, gods, and monsters. Whether that story ends in deliverance or doom, in freedom or annihilation, remains hidden beyond the horizon. But one truth burns through every rumor and superstition: the world is changing, and no chain, no whip, no tower will escape what comes. For the slaves of Naggaroth, this realization is both terror and strange comfort. Terror because it means even the end offers no certainty of salvation. Comfort because it means their suffering is not meaningless. It is part of the storm that gathers over the old world, a storm that will one day break, and when it does, whether by chaos's hand, by the witch king's will, or by the return of forgotten gods, the fate of masters and slaves alike will be decided not in pens or quarries, but in the crucible of the world's last reckoning. There comes a point in every story where suffering ceases to be a matter of days and becomes instead a measure of years, where chains no longer bite like new wounds but harden into the marrow, becoming indistinguishable from the body itself. For the enslaved of Naggaroth, this transformation is not sudden but inevitable. The lash, the frost, the hunger, these cease to be exceptions and become the rhythm of life, so deeply ingrained that memory itself bends around them. Yet in this endurance lies the greatest paradox of all. It is both the highest form of resistance and the deepest form of tragedy. To endure is to deny the Druchii one final victory. Every breath stolen against the lash, every dawn met despite the cold, is a refusal to vanish. The captives' lives are meant to be ground into dust, their stories erased, their names forgotten, but by enduring, by surviving longer than expected, they carve silent scars into the history of Naggaroth. They prove, in the smallest of ways, that cruelty cannot wholly erase humanity. A whispered prayer in the mines, a scrap of bread shared in the pens, a lullaby hummed to soothe a dying child, these are sparks of defiance that outlive any whip. Yet endurance is also tragedy, for it demands a price so terrible that the survivors are not the same as those who were first bound in chains. Hope wears thin, dreams fade into shadows, and the memory of home grows faint until it feels more myth than truth. To endure means accepting that the life one once lived is gone, and that survival itself often comes at the cost of self. Some captives become shadows of themselves, their eyes hollow, their voices flat, their humanity eroded to embers. They live, yes, but what remains of the person who once bore their name? In this, endurance becomes a cruel balance. Some resist by dying defiantly, refusing to bend even at the cost of their lives. Others resist by living quietly, carrying forward the weight of memory. However fractured, neither path is without its cost. Death silences the voice, ending the chance of survival, but preserves dignity unbroken. Life keeps the flame of humanity flickering, but risks smothering it beneath years of torment. Between these two extremes lies the heart of the enslaved experience, a question that has no answer, yet must be faced with every dawn. And yet, even as the enslaved wrestle with this paradox, endurance itself becomes myth. Tales spread of captives who survived decades beneath the lash, who lived so long that overseers aged and died while they remained, hardened into iron by suffering. Some claim such souls cannot truly die, that Mor himself turns away from them, unwilling to claim spirits so scarred. Others whisper that those who endure longest become more than human, shaped by pain into something beyond comprehension, a vessel of sorrow destined to outlast even empires. Whether true or not, such myths feed the will to endure, for if survival can shape one into legend, then even the chains of Naggaroth may become the forge of something eternal. In this way, endurance is not merely survival but narrative, a story carried in whispers and silence, in scars and in shadows. It is the quietest form of rebellion, the most invisible form of defiance. For as long as one breath remains, as long as the frost has not claimed every spark, the enslaved can say to themselves, "The Druchii have not yet broken me." But as the years stretch on and the shadow of greater storms gathers above the old world, endurance alone raises the final, most terrible question. To endure is to live. But to what end? When all chains may one day be shattered in fire, or when the world itself may collapse beneath the weight of prophecy, what does survival truly mean? If endurance is the silent backbone of the enslaved, resistance is the whisper carried in its breath. Rarely does it come as open revolt, for such uprisings are crushed with merciless swiftness. A dozen slaves who rise against their masters are butchered by blades before their cries fade into the cold air, and their corpses are nailed to iron posts as a lesson for the rest. The Druchii understand rebellion well, and they expect it as naturally as the tide. But what they do not always perceive is the quieter resistance, the slow and deliberate acts of defiance that fester like rot beneath their dominion. Resistance may be as small as stealing a tool, hiding it in the frost, and passing it hand to hand until it vanishes into the shadows. It may be the deliberate slowing of work in the mines, striking the iron with less strength, carrying stones one by one instead of two. It may be the simple act of remembering one's own name when every lash of the whip is meant to strip it away. To the Druchii, these gestures seem meaningless, yet to those bound in chains, each act is a reclamation of self, a refusal to become wholly erased. Legends linger of greater acts, whispered in fearful tones even among the elves themselves. There are tales of slaves who poisoned their overseers by corrupting the water barrels with foul herbs scavenged from the frost. Others tell of groups who slipped free in the chaos of battle, vanishing into the black forests where they became half ghost, half legend, living feral lives beyond even the reach of Naggaroth's cruelty. And in hushed voices some speak of captives who in desperation sought the forbidden whispers of chaos itself, trading the lash of the Druchii for the dark promises of the ruinous powers. Whether such stories are truth or merely fragments of hope woven into myth, they linger as the secret backbone of every captive heart. But perhaps the greatest act of resistance is not the knife hidden in straw, or the flight into the forests. It is memory. The Druchii thrive on erasure. They desire to strip away the past and carve their captives into nameless chattel. Yet memory resists this. A Bretonnian peasant whispering prayers to the Lady of the Lake in the freezing dark, an imperial soldier muttering oaths to Sigmar as he sharpens a rusted shard of metal, a Kislevite hunter humming the songs of the steppes. All these are small acts of remembrance that outlive the lash. They are fragments of humanity that no cruelty can entirely extinguish. To endure is to live, but to resist is to live meaningfully. Every secret word, every hidden glance of defiance builds a tapestry unseen but unbroken. The Druchii may enslave the body, but they can never wholly command the will. And in this lies the terrible truth they themselves can never admit, that every slave carries within them a world beyond Naggaroth, a world that will outlast cruelty, even if only in memory. And yet as storms gather across the horizon, and prophecies whisper of empires falling, one cannot help but ask whether such small acts of defiance are enough. Can memory stand against steel? Can whispered prayers outlast the endless march of war? Or do these fragile sparks exist only to remind us that humanity endures even when all else burns? The lives of the enslaved in Naggaroth may seem like isolated tragedies, confined to frozen shores and iron chains, yet in truth they are bound to the greater fate of the old world. For every captive soul, whether human, dwarf or elf, carries within their suffering the reflection of a larger doom, an echo of the ruin that prophecy whispers to all who dare listen. To endure in bondage beneath the Druchii is not only to suffer in silence, but to stand at the edge of a greater darkness that threatens to engulf all of creation. Across the old world, prophets speak in riddles and seers mutter warnings. The followers of Sigmar debate whether the end times draw near, while priests of Mor shiver at visions of graveyards splitting open beneath blackened skies. In Naggaroth, the captives hear these whispers only as distant rumors, carried by raiders or traders, yet even such echoes spark a chilling recognition. Their own lives are proof of what the world can become, should cruelty triumph, should mercy be banished, should power be allowed to grind all beneath its heel. The chains on their wrists are more than iron. They are a vision of a future where all nations might share their fate. For there are darker prophecies still. The return of Nagash is whispered among the dead, a name so feared that even in Sylvania, it is uttered only in shadowed halls. Arca, the ever-chosen, is said to gather strength in the chaos wastes, preparing to unleash a tide that may drown both elf and man alike. Should these shadows spill fully into the world, the enslaved will no longer be an exception. They will be a mirror of what all peoples may soon become. What is life beneath the Druchii but a rehearsal for the dominion of chaos itself? And yet within this grim reflection lies a strange, terrible power. For those who suffer most see most clearly the cost of survival. They know that freedom is not given but taken, that peace is not a natural state but a fragile reprieve bought with blood. To endure chains is to learn, in flesh and in spirit, the depth of what must be fought against. The enslaved know better than most what it means to lose everything, and in this way their existence becomes a warning, perhaps even a prophecy in itself. Some captives cling to this idea, whispering that their torment is not without meaning. They believe that should the world burn, those who endured in Naggaroth will understand better than any how to survive the fires. Others reject such hope as cruel fantasy, seeing no purpose in suffering but the suffering itself. Yet the question remains, unanswered, carved into every scar and echoed in every frozen breath. Are they victims of history, or unwilling prophets of what is yet to come? As the old world staggers toward its uncertain future, the chains of Naggaroth stand as a grim reminder. The fate of the enslaved is not merely their own, but a shadow cast over all who live. For if the world succumbs to chaos, if Nagash rises from his tomb, if Archon marches south, then all men, all elves and all dwarfs will know what it is to kneel in chains, their lives reduced to endurance and whispers of resistance. The enslaved may be forgotten by their captors, erased from records and buried nameless in snow, but in truth, they may be the first to taste the fate awaiting the world entire. In the end, the fate of the enslaved in Naggaroth is not merely a tale of suffering, nor even of endurance or resistance alone. It is a mirror held to the old world, reflecting both the fragility of hope and the inevitability of cruelty when power is unrestrained. Every lash that cracks across a captive's back is more than punishment. It is a symbol of what lies at the heart of the Druchii soul, and by extension a warning of what might come to pass should darkness triumph beyond their frozen shores. Yet within this bleak vision lies a strange, undeniable truth. The enslaved are more than victims. They are living testaments to the resilience of spirit. No matter how deep the frost, how sharp the whip, or how endless the years, something remains unbroken within them. It may be small, hidden, fragile, but it endures. In a world forever balanced on the knife edge between despair and defiance, this endurance becomes its own kind of legend. A story not written in songs or carved into marble, but whispered in the dark, carried forward by those who survive even when all else is taken. And so the tale closes not with triumph, nor with final defeat, but with a question that lingers like smoke over a battlefield. What does it mean to survive in a world so steeped in cruelty? Is endurance enough, or is it merely another chain, binding the soul even as it preserves the body? Does resistance in whispers and memory matter, when the tide of war and prophecy threatens to wash all away? There is no answer that satisfies. The old world offers no mercy, only fleeting reprieves and fragile sparks of hope that must be guarded like embers against the wind. The slaves of Naggaroth may vanish nameless into the frost, their bones ground into the soil of a land that never welcomed them, Yet their suffering echoes far beyond those shores. It is carried in the nightmares of raiders who once heard their cries. It is whispered in the prayers of families who wait endlessly for loved ones who never return. And it lingers in the shadows of prophecy, for if the end truly comes, their fate will be remembered not as an isolated cruelty, but as the first glimpse of a doom meant for all. Thus the story rests uneasily, unresolved, as the old world itself forever is. A tale of chains and frost, of silence and whispers, of lives lived beneath the weight of cruelty yet refusing, even in the smallest of ways, to vanish entirely. The Druchii may believe they own the bodies of their captives, but they will never wholly master their spirits. And in that quiet defiance, in that refusal to be erased, lies a truth that even the darkest of empires cannot wholly extinguish.